Welcome to today's CLC lecture, Living with Water, Lessons from Rotterdam. My name is Michelle, and I'll be your MC today. The CLC lecture series is organized by the Center for Livable Cities as part of our mission to distill, create, and share knowledge on livable and sustainable cities. Today, we are delighted to have with us Mr. Johan Verlinde to share Rotterdam's cutting-edge efforts and plans to adapt to the effects of climate change. Mr. Verlinde is a program manager for the Rotterdam Climate Adaptation Plan, which focuses on preparing the city for climate hazards like heavy rainfall, heat, and drought. We are also pleased to have with us Dutch Ambassador Margaret Vono today. The format of the lecture will start with an introduction by Ambassador Vono. This will be followed by a presentation by Mr. Verlinde, a panel discussion, and a Q&A session with the audience. We are also honored to have with us a panelist today who has been critical in the planning of Singapore's water resources, Mr. Tan Nguan Sen, Senior Consultant at PUB, Singapore's National Water Agency. The discussion and Q&A session will be moderated by Dr. Winston Chow, Assistant Professor from the Department of Geography at NUS. Please kindly hold all questions to the Q&A session. With this, let us start the session by inviting Ambassador Vono on stage, please.
Good morning, everybody. It's very nice to see such a big crowd. Maybe it's because I'm having my birthday today that you knew about it. But I got a special present of Mr. Johan Verlinde because he was willing to share his knowledge on climate and Rotterdam today on my birthday, and I even get to look at you, a very receptive audience. So it's fun today, and my daughter gave me also some flowers. Now, back to why we're here. This is bringing Rotterdam to Singapore and sharing our knowledge with you, but we also have brought Singapore to Rotterdam. You may have heard about the state visit that President Halima Jacob brought to Rotterdam last November. And there she visited the port of Rotterdam, the mayor of Rotterdam. Together with the king, she visited near to Rotterdam in Delft, Deltares, where she was seen in a digital image what could happen in Singapore when the sea level rises again, and when and what will be flooded, and how to work against that. That was pretty impressive. She also noticed that Rotterdam was not such a green city as Singapore, but is trying to learn from Singapore and also adapt more to the green infrastructure, because that's better for climate change as well. Now, personally, I love Rotterdam because it's a multicultural city, it's a port city, and the food is one of the best in the Netherlands. One of the reasons I wanted to work in Singapore was not just the people I'd met before, but also the food. It's one of the best in the world, and also you can see whatever you like. But there's some difference between Rotterdam and Singapore. I want to give you an example. Last week, I was at a cruise here from Singapore Harbor to Phuket, and I met some very nice Singaporean friends. The rest were all Chinese mainland people for the Chinese New Year. So it was a very interesting experience. I'm trying to learn Mandarin, but the Singapore Mandarin is much easier than the mainland Mandarin, I now notice. They told me I had an accent. So. But anyways, we were on an excursion to Phuket, and there I noticed a cultural difference between me being Dutch and my friend from Singapore, because we discovered the whole island, and my first question was, can I do another trek and walk on the mountain? And my friend's question was, where's the luncheon? Because it was only drinks included. So he very adaptedly found a very nice local restaurant. So we had a nice luncheon, and he joined me also on the trek. So I think we can have the best of both worlds between the Netherlands and between Singapore. And I'm very pleased that Mr. Johan Verlinde will share his sort of knowledge working in Rotterdam. And I'm also looking forward to learning more from Singapore, because we as Singaporeans learn as Dutch that you should be very modest. So I have one bio for the American market and one bio for the Dutch market. It's different cultures. However, I've also learned that you should be proud of what you've achieved. And I think if we look at working with climate change, both the Netherlands and Singapore are in the top 5 worldwide, preparing, being very diligent about it, and also sharing with the rest of the world. So thank you very much for having such a nice birthday today with you as a crowd, and I'm looking forward to learning more from Johan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Vono, for spending your birthday with us today. We would now like to invite Mr. Verlinde on stage, please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the introductions and congratulations, Ambassador. Thank you very much for being here. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about our efforts on climate adaptation. It's my fourth time visiting Singapore. And for me it's also very inspiring to see how you fight climate change. The green facades, it's really inspiring for us too. No, this is okay. And Rotterdam is a delta city, very similar to Singapore. It's the second biggest city in the Netherlands. We have 640,000 inhabitants, and we're really a port city. It's what you see over here. This is the city center, and these are all former port areas that are currently being redeveloped into residential and commercial areas. And this is my office, so I'm very lucky to live next to the water. So water really is an integral part of our city. And that's what you see on this picture. Back in the old days, in the 13th century, Rotterdam became a settlement. And our name, Rotterdam, actually stems from a water management structure. And as a civil engineer, I like that very much because we have a stream which is called the Rotte. People built a dam in the Rotte, hence the name Rotterdam. And around that dam, gradually, the settlement grew and grew, and we became a port city. And in this picture, you already see that water management was part of the city. They built canals to get rid of the sewage water and also for health improvement. So water management was also always part of our city. And the triangle you saw on the former picture is now this, and this is all Rotterdam. And as the ships got bigger and bigger, our port activity gradually moved out and even moved out to the sea. This is all reclaimed land, our Maasvlakte 2. And in Rotterdam we face challenges from the water from 4 sides. We have river discharges. When snow in the Alps start to melt, all the water flows through Rotterdam. Then we have sea level rise. Due to climate change, we see that sea level is rising. But also, most of the times in January and February, it could be happening at the moment, we have spring tide combined with a western wind and high river discharges. And then this area will flood quite regularly. People like to live next to the water, and they even tend to accept that their surrounding once in a while floods. That's quite interesting to see. Other problems are groundwater. Due to drought, we see groundwater levels dropping, and a lot of our old houses are founded on wooden poles. And when groundwater level drops, those poles start to rot and your house will shift. I bought such a house with everything I know. It's a bit stupid, maybe. But I can tell you more about that later. But we also have problems with high groundwater tables. With periods of heavy rain, our groundwater tables rise, and then our basements flood. And in Rotterdam, we have a problem with, don't have so much houses, so we make use of our basements as a sleeping room or a kitchen. So when your basement floods, that will be a huge economic loss. But the biggest problem is precipitation. Due to climate change, we see more heavy rain in the summer, like really intense rainfall in a short period of time. And Rotterdam really is a bathtub. And that's why that's such a problem, because 85% of our city is below sea level. Here you see, this is the city center. And everything that is blue is below sea level. You see the old port areas, those are all above sea level. And this is the sea dike. And this is all city. And you can imagine that it's really a bathtub that fills up. We have a sewage system. In Rotterdam, we have a combined sewage system. So both stormwater and sewage water runs to the same pipe. It all flows to the wastewater treatment plant, and we all have to pump it up. And you can imagine that those pipes and pumps have a limited capacity. With climate change, we see water on the streets during heavy rain. And then we have another problem. Everyone, well, it's not a problem, it's good for a city, but everyone wants to move to Rotterdam. It's also a global trend. People want to move to the city. We even see people from Amsterdam moving to Rotterdam. That's really nice to see. But it also can introduce a problem, because if I show you this picture, this is the rural area, and every drop of water, with our subsoil, we're able to infiltrate water. So in the rural areas, water can infiltrate. We have evaporation of our trees and our greens, so it cools down the area. You have some shade. And then you have the city. So almost every drop of water runs off to our sewage system. No green at all, so no evaporation. It heats up. We see temperature differences with our city center and outside of the city of 9 degrees. So if you build more city, you can also introduce more problems. And I always say for Rotterdam, you also have to draw a line like this, because we are in a bathtub, of course. And back in the days, we were very well prepared. This is an image of Rotterdam, I think, at the end of the 19th century. And Rotterdam really was a water city. And then in the beginning of the 20th century, our city council decided we need to transform Rotterdam into a car city. Now look at the next picture. This is the same street. And from a climate perspective, maybe also from other perspectives, this is not the best solution, because before the water could go to the canal, now it goes to our drainage system. It's not so good. And then what we see all around us happening in Europe. Maybe you know the cloudburst in Copenhagen. I always show this picture to the politicians, that it's just a matter of time until something like this happens to Rotterdam. But in Copenhagen in 2011, they had the cloudburst. In 2 hours, 150 millimeters of rain fell onto our city, and it totally disrupted Copenhagen. Communication was gone, energy was gone, but also their emergency energy supply, they put it in their basements for their hospitals, etc. So everything was cut off with $1 billion of damage. And in 2017, we saw heavy rainfall in Paris and Berlin and Amsterdam. So it's just a matter of time until we see a rain event like this. Well, so much for the sad story, because in 2013, we launched our first version of the Climate Adaptation Strategy. I suggest you all to look it up on the internet. It's a nice pack of documents. But this picture sums it all up quite nicely, because the core of fighting the climate is a robust system. You need a good surface water system, you need good drainage system, you need good pumps. That all has to be in order, but that's not enough. We have to adapt. We have to adapt our city. Make sure that the drop of water doesn't flow to our sewage system, add more green to the city, etc. But we cannot do that alone. We rely on other developments in the city, so we have to link in and work together with everyone active in the city. And by doing so, we can create an added value to environment, ecology, economy, and society. Well, this was launched in 2013, but it's still very much accurate for what we do at the moment. So how do you keep a robust system? First of all, we monitor a lot. We have the National Meteorological Institute, who has a rainfall radar. We don't trust it, so we bought our own rainfall radar. Well, the national radar is okay, but the resolution is too low. It tells you something about rainfall in the city, but we want to know rainfall on a street level. And this one is 100 times more accurate. So we know on street level the amount of rainfall that fell onto our city. We can link it to our complaints, etc., and see where we need to take action in our public space. But we also do stress tests. We do a lot of modeling. Here you see a picture of a neighborhood in Rotterdam. And we have a 3D model of the whole city with our sewer system connected to it and the groundwater system. And we let, for instance, the Copenhagen rain event fall onto our city. And all the blue areas is where the water will flow to. But once it also is next to a house, this house will have a risk of flooding due to heavy rainfall. This helps us to know where we need to take action. But we also work together with the Dutch engineering firm Royal Haskoning DHV and the insurer Achmea to work on Blue Label. And this is quite interesting because in the Netherlands, every house has an energy label. It's a European law, you need to have an energy label. A is really good, E is really bad. And we did the same for risk of flooding. So every house gets a label. So we transferred our model into a label which we can communicate with our citizens, but it can also be an incentive to do something on a house level in your garden. So this really helps in communication. But we also use it for ourselves. Here you see a picture of the whole city. And the most bluest, these are all neighborhoods, and the bluest neighborhoods have the highest rate of those risk houses. And it helps us prioritize where we need to take action. But here you also see the red lines. And when there's a heavy rainstorm, those roads will be inaccessible. And we just noticed this half a year ago. When I show this to the politicians, they get scared because these are our main roads. So when we have heavy rainfall, our main roads are inaccessible. So we really need to take action there. And how to keep your system in shape? Well, before I was the program manager, I was responsible for asset management. And there's a nice link between asset management and climate adaptation, because with asset management, you can prioritize your projects. You can determine if it's better to do a bike lane than a sewage pipe, or even a bench in your park. And you can examine where you need to invest in. And mind you, this is just a simple picture. There's a whole framework behind it. But with this, we can take the best action. And now I already hear you thinking, that's like comparing apples to pears. Well, that's actually the case. And how would you compare an apple to a pear? Anyone has an idea? Most of the people say, look at the price. And the cheapest option, that's what I want to do. The cheapest option isn't usually the best option. Just look one level deeper. Think about calories, vitamin C, fibers, antioxidants, or minerals. And what do you want? Am I interested in vitamins? Then I go for an apple. Am I interested in fibers? Then I go for a pear. And we did the same for our city. So from all the strategic documents, we identified the key values of our city. And if you do a project in your city, you should always take care of, does it help in climate resiliency? Does it add up to the quality of the living environment? Can you achieve an added value to the city with your project? And this really helps in communication between different departments, because climate adaptation is not something from the climate department, but also from the transportation department and from the health department. And with this, you have a language to talk. And as I said, there's a whole framework behind it. You can calculate even with it. So that's very good for engineers, of course. And we also plan ahead. We know for every asset in our public space what we are going to do in the next 10 years. So for our roads, for our sewage system. And then we have the maps of where the water goes to. And then you can identify possibilities to do something to redesign the public space. That's what we did over here. This is an area in Rotterdam with a lot of flooding due to heavy rainfall. And I think you can already see why, because it's totally paved, of course. And there was a sewage pipe running over here, which needed to be renewed. And we saw that the parking spaces weren't used for a long period of time. People get rid of their cars and use their bikes in the Netherlands. So together with the people living here, we asked them, what do you want? We open up the ground because we need to renew our sewage system. And they wanted a park. Well, you see it over here. It's of course artist impression, so everybody is dancing. It's always the case, right? And even a butterfly over here. But people wanted a place to relax. More green, of course. But we added also water storage to it. So when it starts to rain, in these puddles, water can flow through. So it's really a water storage. And all the water infiltrates to the subsoil. So this is really an extra storage for the city. Before it all runs off to the sewage system, and now it's infiltration. So you see, people are not dancing. In the real life, it's a totally different story. But you see, it's a park, more green, so it cools down the area too. And here you see water, and it stays in there for 1 day or so, and then it infiltrates. And if you get back to those key values, yes, it is more expensive, but it adds up to the quality of the living environment, it's climate resilient, so this might be a better solution. And it's also a way to convince our directors and politicians to go for these projects. Another one, it's more about coordination between departments. It's permeable pavement. All our secondary roads have these bricks. And most of the times it's impervious, so all the water runs off to the sewer system. And we wanted permeable pavement, so with this pavement, water can flow through the bricks, so to say. But it's a higher investment cost, and you need to maintain it, because you need to vacuum clean these roads every once in a while. And who is responsible for the road? It's the transportation department. And why would they invest in something like this? But we all agreed on our adaptation, on our asset management strategy, so they all know how to talk with these key values. And with the key values, we could convince them to make permeable pavement the standard for every secondary road in Rotterdam when we need to renew the road. So those were some small-scale solutions. This is a bigger solution. I want to show you some water-sensitive urban design. And it's always about multifunctionality. And this is, of course, a massive water storage. This is the surface water system of the city. So it flows all along the city, and we get rid of the lower lying parts to our higher lying part with the water. And we need water storage. But this is also Olympic rowing track. So every once in a while, there's a competition over there. And the funny thing is, I think the city boundary is over here. So we invested in a solution that is actually outside of our city boundary, but because we don't have any space for water storages like this, we invested in it. Another one is a car park. In the city center, we needed a car park 10 years ago, and now we see that cars are slowly decreasing in our city center, but well, then we needed one. And the city center has a huge problem with water. And then we thought, when you start to dig, we might as well combine the car park with a massive water storage. And that's what we did over here. It's totally disconnected, so no cars are damaged during the use of this. It's a 10,000 cubic meters of sewage water storage. And when we use it, we have an extra storage capacity in our city center of 50%. And it really reduces the negative effects of heavy rainfall onto our city. This is way too expensive to invest on its own, but combining it with link in with other energy in the city, you can do something like this. Another one is the water square. We always tend to say that Rotterdam invented the water square, but this is the first one. It's about giving an extra value to the public space and at the same time make way for stormwater storage. And here you see 3 different reservoirs where water can be stored. And this is all stormwater. The last one was also sewage water. This is stormwater. It stays in there for 24 hours, and then we let it infiltrate to our groundwater. So again, this is an extra storage, but also all the roofs of the surrounding buildings are connected to it. And at the same time, we designed it by participation. So we asked all the potential users of the square, think with us about what you want to see on the square. And this is built for sports. There's a stage over here because this is a theater school. There's even a place for baptizing little kids because this is a church. And we didn't have any function for this, but this seems to be ideal for BMXing and skating. So all the reservoirs are used for different things. And I've even seen during summer that there was a service from the church. So they even do services outside. And during rain it looks like this. So you really see that the water is stored over there. And daily use is like this. Last time I showed this in Singapore, people said, "Why are you going to sit in the sun?" But for us, this if we have sun, the few times a year, we go outside and sit in the sun. So you see that it's for water storage, but also for relaxation. But these projects, it's all about retaining the water and infiltrating it. But how about reusing the rainwater? And that's what we do in the urban Waterbuffer. This is a stadium of one of the 3 major soccer teams in Rotterdam, Sparta. And they changed their pitch from a grass pitch to an artificial grass pitch. And did you know that with an artificial grass pitch, you need 8 times the amount of water compared to a real grass pitch? It's amazing. But to play on this, you need to water it, because otherwise you get burned when you do a sliding. But what we do here, we collect all the water that falls onto the roofs and also the surrounding roofs. We collect it, we clean it to a halophyte filter. We store it in our first aquifer in the deep groundwater, and we pump it up when we want to use it, and we use it for irrigating this pitch. So it's really about reusing. This was the first project, and we're now going to roll it out in other parts of Rotterdam. This year, 4 of these projects are planned. And it's really about harvesting, retaining, treating, storing, irrigating. It's really nice, I think. But what I showed you up until now are, I see a mistake in my slide. 40% of the city is public space, and the projects I showed you up until now are all projects in the public space. 60%, not 40, 60% of the city is private space. And if I dig a little bit deeper, from that 60%, 46% is social housing, and that's subsidized housing for local income. Then 35% is private owners and 90% private renters. But if we want to make the city climate proof, we also need that 60%. So that's what we are planning to do with our new adaptation strategy, to focus a lot more on the private properties. So we work together with the social housing corporations. They have those big buildings. Usually they have paved gardens, which all runs off to the sewage system. We motivate them to adapt to green roofs, store water on the roofs, de-pave their gardens, add more green to it. We help them with that, and we also subsidize them. Private homeowners, huge potential to do something. So we come up with coaches who will help you. We do something on your garden, maybe something on your roof. And the other one is project developers. In the next few years, 3 years, we have to build 18,000 houses in Rotterdam. And we also need new office buildings, etc. And we will put in our building regulations that you need to store a certain amount of water in your building, on your building. You can determine it for yourself. And you can really incorporate it in your design. And that's what I see in Singapore. You have incorporated it in your designs, because I like the green buildings. And that's what I would like to see in Rotterdam too. More green in the city. And the movement we try to achieve is that years ago we designed for the Rotterdammers. I don't think a lot of people in Rotterdam even know that there's a water storage over there. But years ago we already transferred to doing something, designing with the Rotterdammers. And the new project is about by the Rotterdammers. Do something yourself. Make your street or your neighborhood more attractive. And at the same time tackling climate challenges. Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk with every neighborhood in Rotterdam, which all have social differences, but also different climate challenges, and help them with improving their quality of living environment. And we believe that talking with the citizens about climate change usually doesn't link with their minds or what they like, but talking about improving your neighborhood does. So that's what we're going to do. And I put some of these measures which we are going to take in the near future on this slide. Yes, we're going to continue with measures in the public space. So with every sewers renewal project, we're going to redesign the public space, add more green to it, retain water. Take measures on our own real estate, because we asked social housing corporations and homeowners to take action. But we have a lot of buildings ourselves, so we also need to transfer them into climate adaptive buildings. And also schools, that's a really important one, I think. So we're going to redesign the schoolyards into climate adaptive schoolyards. More green, but we also link education to it. So education plans linked to their schoolyards. Then what were we going to do together? Yeah, risk dialogues per neighborhood. I already mentioned it. So we're going to talk with every neighborhood, talk with them about what we are going to do in the near future and what they can do and where can we help them. So communication is key in this. And then on private property, a subsidy program. So everyone that wants to take action, we will subsidize what they will do, because a lot of people want to place solar panels on their roofs because there's a return on investment. But with climate adaptation, it's a different story. So that's why we help them also with a subsidy program. And the last one, I think you do a lot on that, is a Rotterdam Roofscape program. We have 14.5 square kilometer of flat roofs. It's a huge potential to do something on the roof. So we also, as designers, see the roof as a fifth facade. Also make use of that. No more black roofs, but more green roofs. And we talk about yellow roofs, so energy roofs. And if you combine a green roof with an energy roof, you even increase the efficiency of your solar panels. We also want polder roofs, so store water on it, store a certain amount of water. And then the last one is red roofs. And this is about leisure, so more rooftop bars in Rotterdam. Well, actually, we don't have any, so that's also something we want to achieve. So really add the roof landscape to the urban landscape. And we have one project also in a street in Rotterdam. This is social housing. There are some public real estate, private homeowners. We got a subsidy from the European Union, and together with all the people and also the corporations, we redesigned this street in a climate adaptive street and make roof of every space that was available. And this it's being built at the moment. It's going to be launched next year. This really is also something as a showcase, which we can show to other locations in the Netherlands. And yes, climate adaptation is very important to make your city climate proof. We always say we want to be climate proof in 2035. It's not that in 2035 you won't see any problems of climate yet again, but we say that everyone needs to have climate in his mind in 2035 and act climate proof. And that's already a really step forward. But it also does something to your city marketing. Because years ago, the Lonely Planet always told people, go to Amsterdam. That's the #1 city in the Netherlands. And now they also said, well, you should also go to Rotterdam. It's a nice city. And also, they have a lot of efforts on making the city, which lies below sea level, fully climate-proof by 2035, including water plazas, car park, water storage tanks, and environmentally sustainable floating houses. So it even does something to your city marketing. Thank you very much for your attention. This was my presentation.
So, thank you, Mr. Verlinde, for sharing Rotterdam's challenges and solutions in trying to achieve a climate-proof status. We would like to request for Mr. Verlinde to remain on stage and invite our panelists, Mr. Tan and our moderator, Dr. Chow, on stage for the sharing session and panel discussion. Dr. Chow will be opening up the floor for questions after the panel discussion. Please hold your questions to then. During the Q&A, please state your name and organization before asking questions or making comments. You might like to raise your hand and our staff will walk to you with the handheld mics.
Okay. Okay, mic's on. Thanks, everybody. I think we were all enthused to listen to Mr. Verlinde's very excellent talk. Hopefully you could draw a lot of similarities between what we've gone through in Singapore together with what he has presented in Rotterdam. It's very enlightening, very positive. Yes, I like the pictures of the happy people dancing, and I saw a picture of a bumblebee floating by in one of your slides as well.
Thank you.
Very optimistic. But as one of my jobs when I teach about climate change and do research about climate change, I like to poke people's bubbles and introduce a bit of pessimism into your viewpoint. Sorry about
very
that
good,
in advance.
very good. Yeah.
So I guess one question I would like to ask you is that you've pointed out that climate change is going to get worse, the impacts, especially in developed cities like Singapore and Rotterdam.
Yep.
You've also pointed out rightly that the stresses from population development, from demographics, from people moving from the rural hinterlands into the cities will put more strain into the key infrastructure and the resources that urban areas have. I guess the question is, at what point do you think that planning for a climate-proof city is too much? The adaptation process, is it too much, you know, to maintain the level of comfort, of security against rising sea levels, against extreme precipitation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, at the moment, we are still designing based on our National Meteorological Institute scenarios from 2014. Next year, they're going to release the new scenarios. And I also read the IPCC report from last year, and what I think is that the scenarios will become more and more severe. So for Rotterdam, we always talk about the multi-layer approach. So the first layer is about prevention, keeping the water out. Then the second layer is about adapting the city. And the last layer is about evacuation plans. And that's also something that might become more and more important. We as a government are prepared, but I don't think a lot of our citizens already know what to do when the storm hits Rotterdam. I think a lot of people feel very, very safe. But what will happen when the dikes break? I don't think there's a high probability of that happening. But we are thinking now about shelters, so vertical evacuation, and also communicating that with our citizens. So I think we are well prepared, but are we still prepared for the future that's coming to us? And this weekend I actually read an article in the newspaper which said, shouldn't we move the lower lying cities of the Netherlands to the higher parts in the east of our country? Well, that might be a tough decision to do so. But thinking about this, it's always in the media, so we work on it all the time.
Good point. So worst case scenarios are a bit of a concern of yours. Can I press you a bit on that? What would you consider to be the worst case scenario for climate change in Rotterdam?
Well, yeah, rainfall is a problem, but not to the extent that it will cost life, I think. Well, it's flooding a few centimeters, 20 centimeters. A dike breach that might introduce severe problems. Luckily, we have a huge storm surge barrier next to the sea. If that closes, it totally cuts off our city from interference from the sea. But a combination of all the melting snow in Austria, and there's a lot of snow at the moment. It's also due to climate change. There's a lot of snow, high precipitation rates. When that starts to melt, other water flows to Rotterdam, then we have the high tide with western winds. That can be problematic. Yeah. So I think flooding from sea and river might be a challenge. And then there's also, we also rely on our port activity. Closing down the river stops parts of those port activities. So what is the best choice to take? I don't know.
That's the answer I was expecting. Okay, before I pass the mic over to Mr. Tan, I noticed that in your presentation you placed a high premium on communication. It's a very important aspect on any sort of climate adaptation project. We've got a very big group of multi-faceted, multi-talented people here, professionals, managers, so on and so forth. I presume you would also have a similar challenge of trying to communicate ideas about climate adaptation, climate risks to a similar sort of audience in Rotterdam. Do you have any sort of advice or any sort of, what do you do to convince people to act on climate proofing the city?
Yes, so the responsibility of climate adaptation for Rotterdam is in the water department. But as I already told you, climate adaptation is something for every agency in the city. So a huge part of my job is giving presentations to every department, every team within the city to talk with them about the climate challenges we face and what we can do. But because the climate adaptation strategy that was launched in 2013, they kind of neglected communication within the own organization. It's all about silos then, but you have to break the silos. So the communication is partly communication within your own organization and partly to the public. So you have to, I think those are two separate things, which you have to invest a lot in it, so yeah.
Thank you. I purposely refrained from not mentioning anything about Singapore because we've got an expert here sitting on my right that is very well placed to discuss about the Singapore context. I'm happy to pass the mic over to Mr. Tan. That's you. I believe you have some remarks and you may have some questions for Mr. Verlinde.
Okay, yeah. First of all, let me wish Excellency happy birthday. Yeah, thank you for taking your time to be with us today. Yeah, I think for us, we have very close ties with Netherlands. Yeah, a lot of our engineers are actually trained in Holland. Yeah. Yes, we go there to learn from you about hydraulics and hydrology.
We both studied in Delft, right?
Yes, I just found out that actually, yeah, we were studying. I did 1 year in Delft studying hydrology, yeah, and together. Yeah. So we were not together, but we were at the same place. Yeah. So in the sense that we share a lot of things in common, not just the technology, but also the geography and all that, right? And for Singapore, we actually have also started to do some of the things that Rotterdam has been doing, which is really to how to implement all this green infrastructure within our city. And of course, in Singapore, we call it the ABC Waters Program. I hope everybody knows what ABC stands for. Yeah, it's an Active, Beautiful, and Clean Waters Program, right? And basically, what we are trying to do is to put water as the center of the planning process. Yeah, that means when you start to plan for a new development, you have to look at the aspect of water. How do you then manage the water, right, within the development? And I must say that we have a lot of support from all the other public agencies, especially HDB, right, our housing agency. And HDB has built a lot of new estates with this water concept in mind, the ABC Waters concept. Right. So a good example is, of course, in Punggol, we have the C39 project, which is we have been completed already. And it's a project where actually HDB built the whole precinct using ABC Waters features. Right. Basically, is to have like bioretention basins, bioretention swales, rain gardens, and even a little field where the children can play when it's dry, but when it rains, it becomes a water storage. So similar like your water square, but not such a big scale, yeah. So we are beginning to do some of these things in our greenfield developments. And I think it's possible for, at the estate level, right, to incorporate a lot of these features where you can actually create ponds, right, to serve as a retention basins. Mm-hmm. But in the good weather, the ponds actually serve as a focal point for the citizens to enjoy the space and to be with water, right? So we hope that we can learn more, right, from Rotterdam on how to do all these things. So my question to Johan is how do you get the citizens involved? Because in Singapore, everybody depends on the government. Yeah, yeah, right. When there's a problem, the government has to go and fix it, right? So it's very hard to get citizens involved in the planning process to take part in that. So our challenge is really like what you said, for climate change, you can build as much of the hard infrastructure, but that can only take care of maybe 90% of the storm events. But for the really extreme events, your infrastructure will not be able to cope, right? And then there will still be flooding. And then how then do you get the citizens involved to not only just to be able to co-create the solution, but also to have that kind of social resilience, right? That in the event of such things happening, that how can they then cope with that situation? So I think that's something that we are trying to now start to learn, and I hope maybe you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, for us that's also quite a challenge, because in the Netherlands you pay a designated tax, so a water levy. So when we come to our citizens and we ask them, do you want to help with climate proofing the city? They say, okay, well, we pay taxes, you fix it. So that was our starting point. But on the other hand, what they want to do is they want a better street, they want a better neighborhood. But we also made some mistakes on that. We want to involve the public, but a few times we did it too late. So we already had an almost finished design, and then we asked the citizens, what do you think about the design? And they said, okay, do you call this participation? No, we want to be involved in the earlier stage. So what we're changing now, that when we know we are going to do a project in 3 years, we ask the citizens, or we tell them what our plans are. We have to renew the sewage system, we have to open up the road. What's your thought about the redesign? So we really ask them to join in the early design process. So don't come to them with already a fixed plan, but with an open plan, and really an open discussion, so that you can discuss almost on the same level. At least that's what we've learned in the last few years on participations. And if they know also, if they can imagine what the problems of a city are, and it's not only the challenge of the city, but also of the citizens, we can work together in fighting climate change.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea, except that it may take a long time, right? Like say, for example, your water square, how many years did you actually take for this whole process to complete?
Well, that was only, I think 1 year of the design process, and then 1 year of building it. But as we know, for the next 10 years, what we are going to do in the city, we also invest in a lot of people that do these discussions with the neighborhood. So part of our investment is also in the communication.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks. On that note about discussions, I think it's a perfect time right now to open the floor for questions. We're having fun discussing climate adaptation and water risks and so on and so forth up here, but we'd like to invite you guys to participate as well. So if you've got any burning questions to ask Mr. Verlinde, please feel free to do so.
Hi, Mr. Verlinde.
Hi.
I'm a CP from CapitaLand China. I would like to ask you, do you have any so-called water reservoir or water shortage issue in Rotterdam, and how you balance this with your temporary water storage for stormwater?
So you mean a shortage in drinking water supply, so to say? Yeah, well, most of the time we have way too much water in the Netherlands, so our reservoirs are always filled up. But what we see is this year we had almost 3 months of drought, and we saw that our reservoirs were depleting. At the moment, we don't have any problems with that. And that also makes I showed you the urban water buffer with rainwater harvesting and reusing it. But the business case is very hard to make, because 1,000 liters of drinking water is €1.50. I think it's around 2.5 Singapore dollars, so it's super cheap. So everything you want to do about collecting stormwater and reusing it is most of the time too expensive. But we don't have any problems with depletion of our drinking water reservoirs yet.
Yet being the operative word.
Yeah.
Okay. Question there?
Yeah, I'm Henry Steed, landscape architect. I'm interested in the question of infiltration, because we're encouraged here to increase infiltration into the soil, and yet we are low-lying in any case, as is Rotterdam. And we don't really know what's going on down below as to whether we are short of groundwater or have too much groundwater. And certainly here we've seen changes in groundwater because of construction taking place and alterations to the substrata. How much, or have you seen, you said 3 months drought, was it monitored to see how much groundwater dropped there, and was that a problem?
Yeah, so we have a lot of these, we monitor groundwater almost in every part of Rotterdam because it's so important for us. And we've seen a huge drop in groundwater table. It's now getting back to normal again. But what will happen, the damages will be, we don't know yet. But we do a lot on both groundwater monitoring and modeling. So with every construction that's going to happen in Rotterdam, we model the groundwater system, what is going to happen. And on the other hand, I said infiltration is a good solution, but it's not the case in every part of Rotterdam. So we now are making a map which parts of Rotterdam are fit for infiltration. Because there are already parts that are low-lying with a high groundwater table. And if you're going to infiltrate, well, you get a problem. We get like the Rotterdam swamp, I think, or so. So it's not everywhere the best solution. You really have to see what kind of circumstances are there in a certain neighborhood and what's possible to do there based on your modeling and your monitoring.
Question at the back.
Hi, I'm Yin Shan from the LTA, so the Land Transport Authority. Mr. Verlinde, you mentioned the subsidies for the climate resilience buildings. Can you tell us a bit more about how that's calculated and how much you pay out?
Okay, yeah, that's a good thing. So we have a few subsidy programs. We have one for private homeowners, and the private homeowner just gets 25% of his investment subsidized. We don't have any regulations on that. So as long as it's about climate proofing, storing water, getting bricks out of your garden, etc., we say, okay, that's good. For professional parties, we have another regulation. So we say for 30 millimeters of storage, you get $30 per square meters. For 60 millimeters of storage, you get more dollars per square meter. So then we have really a technical approach to it, because with the professional parties, we can ask them more, and well, that's our solution, I think.
Flexible solution.
Yeah.
Do we have a question on this side of the floor?
My name is Joseph, and from Shinkon Industrial. Just now we heard about how your city take care of the water come from mountain and come from sky.
Yeah.
But as climate change, we know that the seawater level is going to rise up. Mm-hmm. So how will Rotterdam going to take care of this issue?
Yeah, so all the water that comes from our mountains flows through the big river. But all the city is has no interaction with the river, because we are lower lying. We are up to -7 below the level of the river. With sea level rise, we can close off the gate at the sea, which if we close it, we have no interaction of the sea with the city. So that's how we do it. So we have massive dikes to get the water out. But it's also a problem, because the water that falls onto your city is caught within those dikes, of course. And that's why we have around 1,100 pumps in our city to pump all the water out, so to stay dry, so to say.
Yep. Question in the front.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
Thank you, Mr. Verlinde, for your talk. My name is Lim Han Chi, and I'm a lecturer at James Cook University. My question to you is just about the case studies that you mentioned for Rotterdam. Is a city with strong governance. It's a well-planned city with a reasonable amount of financial ability to carry out projects like that. Yeah. And I would say that would be a similar case for Singapore as well.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask your thoughts about implementing these sorts of ideas for cities in our neighboring countries, for example, Jakarta or Manila, which will also face problems related to extreme precipitation and floods. What would be a good approach or a strategy for cities with not as strong governance, with less financial abilities, and so on? So I'll be interested in your thoughts about that.
Yes. Well, at 6 o'clock I fly to Jakarta, because that's also a sister city of Rotterdam, and we help them also with water management. But it's quite a challenge over there, because if I think about the multi-layer approach, so first prevention, then adaptation, and then taking evacuation measures, it should start with prevention, and that's really the first thing that you need to do, I think. Coordination also with different cities. What I see in Jakarta, that they get all the water from Bogor and the higher lying cities. And we have the same, of course, with Germany and France, and we do a lot of coordination also with our neighboring countries. That's, I think, where it should start. So really work together and prevent the things to happen. And adaptation is, I think, maybe one step too far for cities like that. So first start with prevention. But it will cost a lot of money. So they also get help, of course, from other countries and cities all around the world. We also have a nice program where we train young staff of Jakarta. They come to Rotterdam for a few months and work in our organization to see how we work with water. But then again, in the tropics, you have quite different conditions. So I always tell them, please make the translation from Rotterdam conditions to tropical conditions. Because I think if you're going to build a water square in Singapore or Jakarta, it needs to be 10 times bigger or so, because your precipitation rates are way higher.
If I could exercise the chairperson's right to follow up on Prof. Lim's question, but doesn't Jakarta and maybe Bangkok, they suffer a different stress in the sense it's not sea level rise, it's not extreme precipitation, but land subsidence from lots of groundwater extraction. Then how would you be best placed to advise or to tell them to adapt?
Yes, so our groundwater specialists also try to help Jakarta. The thing is, I think it starts then with drinking water supply, because everyone pumps up the deeper groundwater where subsidence rates are almost 20 centimeters a year in parts of Jakarta. So with a sinking city, that's very difficult to. So drinking water supply might be the first step. Well, it's very challenging to say what will be the best measure to take in such challenging cities.
Question at the back, then in the middle.
Hi, I'm Trina from the National Parks Board. Thank you for the talk. I'd like to ask on the point on communicating with the public. You mentioned about talking to the neighborhood on what you can do in the near future and how you can help them. I'd like to ask, what is the best form of communicating this to the public?
Well, that's actually a really good question, because every neighborhood has its own dynamics. And that's what we did first. So we did an investigation, what kind of people live in every neighborhood. And we adapted our communication strategy to the neighborhood. Some neighborhoods, they like to be told what to do. So just, you need to do this or you need to do this. In other parts of Rotterdam, if you do that, people say, whoa, then we're not going to do that. So we have a really differentiated communication strategy for every part of Rotterdam that fits to the needs of the people living there. So, but it's still a challenge, but that's how we like to do it.
Interesting challenge in Singapore. Could I get that question at the back, then you, sir? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Benedict from the Ministry of Environment, Water Resources. I have a question about R&D. How much R&D do you do, to climate-proof Rotterdam? And what are the kinds of areas that you do research and development in? Thanks.
Yeah. So next week, our new climate adaptation strategy is in the executive board. And then we also ask extra budget, because we think we need a lot of extra budget to climate-proof our city. And a part of that is going to R&D, because we know quite a lot about rainfall and sea level rise, because that's, well, otherwise we were already drowned in the Netherlands, I think. But we don't know so much about groundwater, subsidence, heat, drought, and those parts. And we're going to do a lot on that in the near future. So we need every help with that. And you, of course, already know a lot about heat. So we need to know everything you know.
I noticed you didn't specify how much percentage of your budget goes into R&D there. Can I put you on the spot there?
Well, it's in my bag. I can show you.
I tried, huh? Okay, we have a question from this gentleman in the front. I'll pass you the mic, and you need to stand up anyway.
Thanks so much. Wonderful presentation, Mr. Verlinde. Thank you. My name is Shiva. I'm from Renergy Asia. We are a circular economy advisory focused on cities. We're also trying to build an innovation platform. So obviously, wonderful presentation. I do notice, though, that it's the strategy for Rotterdam, at least, has been very government-centric, as in the public sector has taken a bulk of the responsibility to deliver a climate resilient strategy, right, an adaptation strategy. I see a lot of government reps as well in this room. But my question is actually, because I'm the innovation guy, right? We find startups, we define challenges for them that are futuristic. What role do you see for the private sector, particularly in Asia, outside of Singapore, where government capacity, especially at the municipal level, can be weak, right? So what role do you see for the private sector, for startups, for technology, for venture capital in realizing a vision like this? Thank you.
Well, we need the private sector. You're right that this strategy is all coming from the government, but we cannot do it without the startups that are there also in Rotterdam, because there is so much on the climate we don't know. So that's why we also invested in the rainfall radar. It's not something you want to maintain or do as a city government. It's something from the private sector. So we try to invest in all different kind of startups, give them an acceleration, so take the next step into helping other cities all around the world. So that's, we need to do it together. So about research, we don't know anything about heat. We also want to invite the private sector to come up with sensors, etc., but also with solutions. How do you store water? What can you do on a household level? We also need the private sector for that. So I think in all steps of the climate adaptation strategy, you need them. It's not something you can do as a government alone.
I believe we have a,
Hi, Mr. Verlinde. I'm Li Hong from Keppel. My question to you is, on your last slides, on the Lonely Planet slide, you mentioned something about sustainable floating building, sustainable floating homes as one of the things. But you didn't touch on that. So my question to you is, how does this floating buildings policy fit into your plan? As in, is Rotterdam actively encouraging it vis-a-vis reclamation, whether Rotterdam is still doing reclamation for expansion and so on?
Well, you saw from, you see it on this picture. So you see those old ports which aren't used anymore, which is a huge potential for floating homes, because people want to live next to the water. And now one of those port areas is already transformed into floating houses. And I think in the near future, you will see it more and more that floating houses will be built.
Johan, is it, which particular slide was it?
Oh, it was already back there. It was.
The last slide, right?
Yeah, your slide, which was on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but then the bigger one. Yeah, you see all those port areas, they aren't used anymore. We transform them into tidal parks with floating houses. And maybe you heard of the Global Center of Excellence on Climate Adaptation, which will help countries and cities all around the world to accelerate adaptation. And their head office is in Rotterdam, and the head office will be in a floating office. So I think, how climate adaptive can you be if you adjust to the level in the river? So we will see it more and more in the near future.
Okay. I think we have a question on this side of the floor.
Yes, thanks. Hi. Dave Scott from Arup with another question about community involvement, engagement. Instinctively, it feels like a nice thing to do and a right thing to do to involve the public in the design of projects, especially if they're being led by the public sector. But I wonder if, from your experience, you can say sort of more specifically how the involvement of people has actually led to other measurable benefits, like other maybe improvements to design, or perhaps against your asset management framework or something like that.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Well, we are starting in a neighborhood at the moment, the Zomerhof Quartier, which is a neighborhood which is really developing. And we thought about other measures than the public liked, because we were thinking about another water plaza, which was all concrete, and they came up with the rain garden idea. And actually what they did before the rain garden was there, they took away some tiles themselves, just as a guerrilla action or so. They built a small rain garden themselves as a proof of concept, and that's what we enlarged to the rain garden. So we really make use of the knowledge that's there in the neighborhoods.
Interesting feedback.
But still, this is a neighborhood where the people come to us with ideas. There are also neighborhoods where it's really hard to get people at the table.
Question from the front.
Hi, I'm Olivia Jensen from the National University of Singapore. Have there been any unintended consequences of the projects that you've engaged in, either positive or negative, or any surprises in the way that people have interacted with the environments that have been created?
Yeah. What we've seen in the last few years that when we renew our sewage system, the sewage system has a lifespan of 60 years, and in the 70s and 80s of the last century, all the sewage system was built, so to say, a lot of parts of the sewage system. And we renew the sewage system, and what we see is that those old pipes, they leak because they are older and they shifted from each other. And we say to the people, okay, we're going to renew the sewage system because that's needed to climate-proof the city. But what happens? New sewage pipe, they are leak-free. Groundwater table rises instantly, and the basements flood. Yeah, this was not intentionally. And then the people say, okay, so you ask us to take action, and you say you renew a sewage system to be climate-proof. What's your problem? And how do you repair such a damage in communication? That takes quite some time, yeah.
Are you sure the sewer pipes didn't leak when the basements get flooded?
Yeah.
I hope not. Okay. Any more questions from the floor? Yes.
This is Laura van Heugen from Deltares, or NUS Deltares, if I may mention. Thank you for your talk. Very interesting to hear, although I'm from the Netherlands myself. Still learning new things. You're talking a lot about prevention and guidelines for new buildings and new houses.
Yep.
I was wondering, are you also looking into the environment in which you're placing the new buildings, whether they're actually suitable or what are the risks are before you put them there? Is that something you looked into?
Yes, well, at least we do that now for rainfall, so we know what areas are that are flood prone due to heavy rainfall, but not for other climate hazards like heat, etc. And that's what we want to do. So also think about orientation of buildings. Do they introduce more heat to the environment, so to say? But that's also something we still need to learn. So that's something for the R&D, I think. So, well, we need to do it, but it's still in the early stages.
Any further questions? We still have a bit of time. Yep.
Hi, I'm Andrew Wittveen-Bos, Dutch engineering consultant.
Hi.
I'm also from Rotterdam, so I wonder what can Rotterdam learn from Singapore?
Oh, we can learn a lot because you have so much green in the city, and that's what I like so much. So every building, every street, everything in the city is green. And that's what I would like to see also in Rotterdam. So all our buildings are concrete or glass, almost no green at all. Yeah, maybe on the roof, but not on the facade or something. So I'm staying at the Oasia Hotel, which is totally green, which is so amazing. It's like a natural air conditioning too. So we can learn a lot about that. I think it's also in your regulations to introduce more green with new developments. That's really something we can learn from you.
Likewise. I believe we had a question from a gentleman at the back. Yes. On the left hand, my left on the room.
Yeah.
Hello, it's Yin Shan from LTA again. I see we're in the any other business section, so I wanted to ask a question that's so slightly wider, to related to climate change, but not necessarily to water. And maybe I just extend the question to all of the panel because I think it's quite a slightly wider range. So one thing that I noticed when I moved to Singapore was the amount of plastic waste we generate. So, when I order my shopping online from FairPrice, actually I get 7 huge plastic bags because every different department will have a different plastic bag. So, I'm only buying a week's worth of groceries, but I have, a plastic bag for every day. So similarly for our takeaways, if you have a cup of coffee, then you have a lot of polystyrene cups and that kind of thing, a lot of plastic waste. So I understand, of course, in Singapore here, we're gearing up on the recycling aspects. I read a recent article about how a lot of a lot of materials can't be recycled because they're tainted by food. But just wanted to open to the panel and maybe to the floor as well, how else we can reduce the generation of plastic waste here in Singapore.
How much time do we have? You want to speak first? Well, I don't claim that much expertise on climate change despite my day job and my night job with the IPCC. But yes, Singapore has taken massive steps towards recycling. Last year, there was the year of climate action. This year, we're transitioning to a year of zero waste. It's important to note that, yes, we do use a lot of plastics, and the focus seems to be on recycling. But the first step towards reduction, I guess, should be more important. That's why the 3 R's, as my daughters always tell me, is reduce, reuse, recycle. Too much attention is often focused towards the last R rather than the first R. And what I would like to see, and what I tell my students and what I tell everybody that I meet is focus on that instead of throwing your plastic cup into the recycling bin. Don't waste, don't use things that you don't require. That would be, and to that end, well, what you've mentioned about communication, I guess is more important. The softer skill of persuading people not to use so much is just as important as whatever technological advances that are being put into place from R&D or from engineering solutions. That's my take on that. But it's a 1 minute take. If you want a 15-minute lecture, come to my class and I'll tell you.
I think Europe has a very good system, right? Because you make the producers take back whatever packaging and all that. I think that's what we are trying to do now. That means you actually should try to minimize the use of plastic right from the beginning. It means whoever manufactures a product, they have to be responsible then to take back that product. So I think it's quite like in Europe, where if you buy the bottle drinks and all that, then yeah, the manufacturer's got to take back the bottle to recycle and all that. So that is really, I think, the key, because once you can reduce the generation of the plastic, right, in terms of packaging or whatever it is, then you have a smaller problem to deal with at the end. And I think already some retailers are doing that. They have these recyclable cups and what. And then you go and buy your drink, you get a recyclable cup, and then you can just use it again the next time, yeah. You want to say something about what the EU is doing?
Yeah. Well, I think for 2 years now, you also get charged for plastic bags in every shop in the Netherlands now. And I think it's about 10 cents. And it's not about the 10 cents, but people, because they have to pay for it, start to think, okay, I have to use a reusable bag. And now you see everyone in the Netherlands using reusable bag, and it's a big reduction on the use of plastic bags, so that might also be an idea.
We are economic animals, like it or not. Prices at a particular price point will change our behavior, so yeah. Yes, Madam Ambassador.
You startled me with the plastics, because that's something which I'm very involved with myself. My previous job was at the Ministry of Environment in the Netherlands, and I was the one responsible for charging for the plastic bags. And actually, in the law it says only 1 euro cent. So it should be 1 euro cent of more that you're going to pay, but we skipped the 1 and 2 euro cent coins in the Netherlands, so in the effect it was 5 or 10 cents that was charged. So it was about the bother. And what I noticed that the first month in January when we started, that I got a lot of crap when I was always very honest, saying, this is our measure. And they said, what, the government is pushing us again? And then, in the beginning, I think 80%, 80, was against it. And in 9 months, we did a review, and 79% or so, it was like it was a communist sort of interview, was in favor of it. Why did it change? Because it became sexy not to use plastics anymore. There were a lot of young Dutch designers who designed reusable shopping bags. Actually, I have a lot of them. I always take them when I go here to a supermarket, and I refuse the plastic bags because mine are better looking anyway, and I stand out for the crowd. And I think that's the way that we changed it in the Netherlands, because sometimes you need to start with the government, because people are creatures of habit, so you need to push. But it only will become a success if people believe in it, And that's what we see now in the Netherlands. Like my daughter, she likes to wear the jeans, the cool jeans, and they're made of reusable materials because those are the cool designers now. And I see that happening on a smaller scale in Singapore, where you have some very nice designers who are working that way. And the government is pushing it. So in the 1.5 years I've been here, I've seen a change already. And I think it will go very fast. And what I see is that Singapore, in a way, is leading the way for the rest of Asia. So I would like to ask you to work with me and others to sort of boost this. It's a tiny red dot here, but I think the impact can be huge also for the whole of Asia.
Okay. If there are no further questions during this discussion, I have one last one for you. Yes.
Must be a tough one then.
It's a counterfactual because I like thinking differently. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in Rotterdam there was a major flood that occurred in the 1950s.
South of Holland.
Yeah, that precipitated a lot of the forward thinking, the progression of flood management and resilience towards that. There hasn't been a major flood of that level ever since.
Yes.
In Singapore, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Tan, the last time anyone died from a flood, I believe, was in the late 1970s. We've been very, very proactive and very successful in our flood management. So can there be a case that can be made that both Rotterdam and Singapore have been too successful in flood management and our citizens, both in Rotterdam and in Singapore, have become too comfortable in terms of managing floods?
Yeah, well, that's a tough question. But I think that everyone in Rotterdam feels very, very safe. They don't tend to think about climate-proofing their houses because there aren't any effects yet at the moment. And at the same time, I see the city council thinking in the same way, right? Well, nothing happened in the last few years, so why should we invest in climate adaptation? But you see more and more happening, what's happening all around us. Copenhagen, they had $1 billion of damage, and I think now also almost $1 billion of budget to climate-proof the city. But we want to be in front of that, prevent the city. And you're right, in the 50s we had those major floods in the Netherlands, which led to our Delta program, which is a separate institution in the Netherlands with a budget that cannot be touched by politicians. And so, so we really need to invest in keeping Rotterdam dry, keeping the Netherlands dry, and well, we have a role in that, and more and more and more we have to engage also our citizens through communication, I think. And not only about risks, but also about making your street, your garden, and your neighborhood a better living environment.
Okay, on that note, it leaves me to firstly thank Mr. Verlinde for your time and wonderful talk. Could we give him a round of applause? Thank you again. And also to wish Madam Ambassador another happy birthday.
Thank you, Mr. Verlinde, Mr. Tan, and Dr. Chow for the lively discussion on the successful ingredients in planning for climate change.